Welcome to the Biblical Leadership at Work podcast. I'm your host, Jason Woodard. On this month's episode, we will meet Gary Harpst to discuss his book, Built to Beat Chaos. Gary is an experienced business leader and entrepreneur. His book looks at business management through a biblical lens and dives very deep into many important topics. For example, we discuss a unique but absolutely correct view of the leader's role in an organization.
Really, a leader is in the science of integrating people. The scientist is in the integration of things, and that scales well, but the science of integrating people doesn't. And if you, as a leader, don't make this transition from I'm integrating atoms to I'm integrating people, you can't make the transition.
And we also discuss the impact that love has on our effectiveness as leaders.
If we don't love each other, we don't treat each other right, we cannot possibly become what he intended us for to be.
And Gary talks about the dramatic differences that humanity has made in advances in technology versus the lack of advances in the area of human relations.
So we've made this extraordinary progress in the realm of science that obeys the laws of physics. And the reason is we can study those laws and learn and build and continue to integrate, assuming they're going to work. When it comes to societies, we've made no progress at all. It's literally true. Socially, we're no more advanced than Cain and Abel, killing each other, and we just have better technology to do it.
So join me now as we discuss these and several other important topics and unique perspectives regarding biblical leadership. Okay, well, Gary Harpst, brother, welcome to the show. Really appreciate you coming on, and I look forward to digging into the topics of the book. And I think it's a super relevant book for any Christian leader. And so I'm really excited to talk with you about a lot of the topics. But before we get started, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about who you are and some of your background?
Sure. I grew up in Northwestern Ohio, farm boy, and was always fascinated with kind of problem solving, integrating things, organizing things, putting things together was a theme through my education and life. And I ended up with two other partners starting a business when I was 30 years old. And it was a wild adventure. I'd never been a CEO or a leader of a company before. But the business itself was a form of problem solving. It was a software company that helped small, mid-sized organizations run their business, kind of a business management and accounting and those sorts of things. I was a believer when I started that business, but I had no idea what it meant to integrate faith and in the business world. My partner always said that running a business was probably the best laboratory he knew of for exposing your need for God. And I would say today that I think recognizing that your greatest need is to need God, then business is a good environment to figure that out. So I was fortunate to have a laboratory of learning 20-some years of really rapid growth and success. And we ultimately sold the business to a larger competitor and turned around and sold that to Microsoft. And it left me at a fairly young age. Everything's relative, but I was 50 years old and had capital and time. And I decided to devote the next phase of my life to helping other organizations avoid some of the mistakes we made in that growth from 10 employees to 500.
Gary, I really appreciate you referencing 50 as young. I'm 51, so it is relevant and relative, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, that's right. Everything is relative. So now people 80 are young for me. So not quite, but anyway, that's my history. I've got I married late in life, 35, and that worked out awesome. And my wife's younger than I am, so she keeps me younger. And we've got 2 boys and a girl and 4 grandchildren. So life's full and good and engaging.
Well, thank you for that. One of the things you talked about already, and it was one of the very first topics in your book, and one that I wholeheartedly agree with, is that chaos refines us. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's really a deep, deep question because you can go so many different directions. But, really what the Bible teaches, and the truth is that we're not, as a people, we're not, when we're born, what God intended us to be. There's something flawed, and you could argue that it's genetic, that there's something broken inside of us. God says it's our heart, that we kind of want wrong things that are not good for us or good for others. And the gospel answer is that you can't remodel that. You have to replace it. You have to have a new heart. And so most of us need something that, we've got five senses connected to this world, our eyes and ears and taste and all those sorts of things. And so we have to almost be pressured into letting go of what we can see and touch and realizing the truth is bigger than that. And the relationship with God is supernatural. So I find the business world, the pressure that comes, the overwhelmed number of decisions, and you finally realize I can't operate in this realm. I have to flee to a God who knows more than I do and thinks differently than I do and get close to him. And I don't know how to do that without the pressure you're talking about, without being thrust into things that are so far over your head, you can't handle it. And is that pleasant? I guess Hebrews says no discipline is pleasant in the moment, but after you're through it, you realize wasn't any other way,
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah.
And one of the things that I've heard other people talk about in this realm of faith and work, and you talk about it in your book, is how that we've been given dominion over the earth and a lot of times you just think about, the crops or farming or, the natural world, but it's really stepping into chaos that is in the world and bringing some level of order out of it and having dominion in that area, whether it's a manufacturing plant or a business or a farm or whatever. But you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think an anchor truth is, I think we grow up and use the term chaos as something that's being done to us and sort of an evil in and of itself. But if you really study what the creation narrative says, it gives us a different starting point to think about what chaos is. So when you're in the middle of it, how do you think about it? And the Genesis truth is that for some reason, God emphasized in the creation story that he actually created chaos before he created anything else. It's not really obvious. You read the first verse. It says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and it was void and without form. And you think, why did he put that void and without form in there? And he was letting us know that chaos itself was created by him. And then he sets about bringing order out of that chaos. Not all of it, just some parts of it. And then later on, he says, we're created to be like him. And so I think there's a model there that says, hey, this chaos thing is there for you, and you're actually built to have dominion. You are designed to face chaos and figure out how to take your little piece of it and bring some order to it. It's the highest calling there is, according to the Bible, to go into something that is chaotic and broken and not working and start to chip away at bringing some order out of that. And I think mentally, if you can realize that's a God-given call, it can change your attitude about what you're in the middle of. And it's kind of freeing to realize the chaos is actually there for me. And as I learn to organize and build things, I know God and I have a fulfillment because I was built to do that. And yeah, is it hard? Sure. God never intended for our lives to be easy. He meant for them to be meaningful. And those are different objectives.
Yeah, for sure. I think also on that topic, so as I've read through your book and thought about what you wrote, and I will say you go really deep in these topics, and which I love. I mean, you go very deep in how you look at these things in each of these chapters. And one of the takeaways I've had is that I used to think of a situation as chaotic or not. It is or it is not. But now I think, Gary, that everything that, like, the whole world is still in chaos. It's not is or is not. It's a matter of degree.
Yeah.
And so, I'm at my current role is at a company where I would have said it's not chaotic, and it's not, but it is. It really is, because it's still not perfect. It's not in perfect order. And so it's much less. I would change now to say it's much less chaotic. And so my job is still to bring more order and to know, like you said, that it's that calling to go into that situation and bring order from that. And what a blessing that is to the people that it impacts on a day-to-day basis, to bring to not eliminate it. I don't think you said in the book, you never eliminate it, but to reduce it. And even as you reduce it, there's one of the things that you mentioned was when you reduce some or maybe eliminate a pocket of chaos, more chaos shows up.
The funny version of that is, I remember we built our house years and years ago, and we waited a long time to be able to afford landscaping. And we were just really excited to put that landscaping in place. Then we got it done. I didn't realize for 30 years I had to maintain it,
Oh, yeah. That's a great example.
You go from one order of chaos to another. And anyway, I totally agree with you. And I do want to point something out that sometimes people don't think about. They think about at work, okay, I go to a factory setting and it's chaotic. Really, there is nothing in life that is not a form of bringing order out of it. Cooking a meal is a supreme example of taking hundreds of ingredients that you could have used from the cupboard, picking some according to a recipe, and having a feast. And you notice your grandmother or whoever is the big cook in your family, they're in their zone when they're doing that. They're just loving it. They're complaining about how hard it is and all that, and yet they're loving it. And so there is no type of work. I mean, if you're a preacher, you are bringing chaos or order out of chaotic souls, And so I personally just think it's a universal thing. There is nothing in life. There is no person that is not in some way bringing order, raising kids, education, you name it. It's
everywhere. It's everywhere.
It's everything.
Yeah.
And we're all created to be leaders in that sense. We're all created to overcome something.
Especially as Christ following leaders, we cannot simply step into the chaos and react to it. I think that's a big thing. We'll talk about that in the book. I've heard the same thing on over and over again as I've interviewed people on this podcast. Ours is to come in and lead order and manage order, and so that's our calling, is to help bring some level of order out of the chaos. You write in your book that the way to overcome chaos is by determining purpose. Can you expound on that?
Yeah, this is something, even at my age, that the richness and the understanding is deepening in me on that idea that really our first priority or our first calling as a human and as a leader is to determine purpose. And it is really interesting. The more you study purpose, the more you realize it is just the flip side of chaos. Chaos is not really a thing into itself. It's a set of resources that have not yet had purpose applied to it. The purpose idea is central. And I like to use the example of, I go into a forest, I'm a lumberer, and my idea is to make lumber available to others. So I go into this chaotic forest, cut down the trees, and I produce a stack of lumber of different sizes and shapes. Well, I go to build a house, that looks like order, but I go to build a house and a truckload of lumber sitting outside my house, or my unbuilt house, is chaotic. It's not yet been applied to the architecture of the house. And so you have no idea what to do with 2 before 1 unless you've got a plan, a purpose. And then you can decide where that 2 before goes. And so much of our life is when feel like we're in overwhelming chaos, the first place to start is to stop and think about, what is my purpose? Because if I can't get that clear, then all my actions will simply contribute to more chaos. But if I do have a purpose, then I have a much better way to approach that stack of 2 befores and decide which one to pick up next and do something with. So I think I'm growing in my own understanding of this, but I am more and more, when I feel chaotic, saying, wait a minute, what's the purpose here?
The chapter when you talk about people don't obey the laws of physics. And one of the things that really jumped out to me was I may say this wrong, so basically it's how I remember what you wrote. It was that the building blocks that God used to create the human body, the DNA that we have, were pretty simple. There's not a lot of ingredients, but yet he took those simple ingredients and put them in the right order, and things kind of fire in the right sequence. And I guess my big takeaway from this chapter was the fact that for leaders, it's so important do the same as far as take the right ingredients, so people and process and organize them to do the right things in the right order.
For me, another way to get order in your life is to establish fundamental principles and truths. Here, 2 and 2 are 4. And if I can get that truth in my heart, then I can do engineering. And so a fundamental truth, and it comes from Genesis again, and I think it's very subtle, is that God created, actually the whole universe is 98% hydrogen and helium, 98%. And our bodies are 95% carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And so there's a message here that God took the physical realm and did incredible integration. So much of bringing order out of chaos is integration. It's putting things together in a different way. 2 before is nailing to each other. And so God built this. Our bodies actually have 100 trillion cells, and each cell has 100 trillion atoms in it. It's mind-boggling that we are a whole bunch of hydrogen and oxygen and carbon assembled in a particular order, like you said. But here's what you realize, well, this body works pretty well and everything is pretty predictable most of the time. And you say, how did God do that? Well, he did it with the laws of physics, and there's energy rules that hold these things together, and they always work the same way. But in Genesis, when God said we're created to have dominion, he added this little phrase that is where our trouble is. He says, you must multiply and increase to do it. And he was basically saying you can't have dominion over the earth unless you work with other people to do it. He gave each of us an individual heart and individual desires, and none of us obey the laws of physics. We all have our own set of desires, and frankly, my desires today are different than they were yesterday. So you try to build something complex like a body and have each one of those cells with their own mind, it wouldn't work. And yet somehow God is wired into this universe. When he created this, he's given us a task that I think is impossible without aligning ourselves with him. So he has this dimension of advancement that we can't achieve because we're building an organization is integrating people who think differently, have different desires, and they each have their own set of chaos. And then you're trying to build a nation or an organization out of this. It is totally impossible. And I like to ask questions. And one question you ask yourself is, what explains the fact that in whatever, 5,000, 10,000 years of written history, we have gone from inventing the wheel to rocket ships to the moon. So we've made this extraordinary progress in the realm of science that obeys the laws of physics. And the reason is we can study those laws and learn and build and continue to integrate, assuming they're going to work. When it comes to societies, we've made no progress at all. It's literally true. Socially, we're no more advanced than Cain and Abel, killing each other, and we just have better technology to do it. So you have to ask yourselves, how is it that we advance so far on one dimension, the science dimension, but in the integration of people dimension, we haven't advanced at all? And you could argue right now we're going into a kind of we're going into a deterioration.
Socially. I think it's socially. Yeah, we are in some ways.
And so Genesis hints at this. And I personally believe, I'm speculating, but I believe the reason God set this laboratory up like this is to force us to realize we can't have what we were created for without him involved in our aligning with each other. If we don't love each other, if we don't treat each other right, we cannot possibly become what he intended it for it to be. And so explains why Jesus came.
Gary, that's really, really insightful. I mean, so what I'm hearing you say is that if we look at how humans have followed the laws of hard sciences, right, that we have, and so, yes, we've gone even in the last 50, I'm 50 years old, and I've seen incredible advances in technology. However, socially, we've seen that we don't follow, there are laws that God has put down for us and how we interact as human beings, and, all those social principles that the Bible lays out for us very clearly. And as we, not follow them, but even B, rebel against them, we see a degradation in human relations. And I think, that's absolutely spot on. And so That's really insightful. And as leaders in an organization, we know what those principles are. I mean, you talk about them in your book, everything from, effective one-to-ones and building those relationships with your coworkers and people and collaborating. Those are all things that I'm going to say any business leader, whether they're a Christian or an atheist or an agnostic or any faith, they know that those are effective in the workplace. I mean, everything you read about, it talks about the impact that proactive social behavior and collaboration and building relationships has in the workplace.
Yeah. It does set up the gospel message, though, because the Old Testament, which is, 3/4 of the Bible, proves to us that even though we recognize we need to behave in those ways, we're not able to. And so there is something broken in the human design that we can try as hard as we want to self-improve and treat people better, et cetera. It just doesn't last. We're subject to all kinds of desires and forces that take us off path. And by the way, that's what led to me becoming a Christian. Was I was so frustrated with the observation of my own behavior, this split personality of I think I want to do this, but I end up doing this. And I see it in all the people around me, good people saying good things, but still not doing them. And C.S. Lewis, in Mere Christianity, he has this quote that is really an astounding quote if you think and I'm paraphrasing, but he says the key to understanding man and the universe, I mean, that's a pretty big statement, is to realize that all societies basically agree on what is right, tell the truth, treat each other fairly, don't steal, and none of them do it. And he says if you can grapple with that truth, you can begin to unwind why are we here, what's going on, and it sets up the gospel because basically the gospel is you can't fix it. Only God can fix it. And that's a pretty big foundational thing to get straight in your life.
I just bought a paperback copy for my youngest son is 17. And so he's on summer break now. And I've always challenged, we have 3 kids, 2 are grown. And, but in the summertime, Dad challenges, we're going to do some extra physical work and we're going to do we're going to keep reading. So he's going to read that.
Yeah. Good for
he's
you.
going to read Mere Christianity this summer, and he and I are going to talk about what he thinks. So yeah, that's brilliant work. Hey, Gary, I want to ask about a particular topic that you write about that I found fascinating. I emailed you questions about it, and you call it the execution paradox. The reason that I love this idea is this is something that I've experienced, but I could never put you graph it in one, you have a graph that shows a little bit, but I'd like for you to talk a little bit about that because I think leaders need to understand, we've kind of walked through the topics that we have, but then as you start to execute and do, this is something you're going to run into. So could you expound on that and explain what that is to the audience?
Yes, it has to do with these 2 different dimensions. Laws of physics, things scale. So I can add 1 million, 1 trillion, 1 billion or trillion cells, and they still all behave the same way because they're obeying the laws of physics. With people, because of the randomness of the way we behave, there's an entropy that takes place that with 3 people, it's much easier to be on the same page than it is 10. And so the graph you're referring to points out that it's a very simple example, but it just says if you went from 3 people to 25, 24, that's an 8-fold increase in people. So it's kind of a linear increase. But actually, if you look at the potential combinations of interactions, it's like 117-fold increase in potential interactions. And so the execution paradox is if you have a good idea, whether it's a church or a business or whatever, the evidence of a good idea is people want it and it grows. Well, how does it grow? You people want more of it, so you hire more people to deliver it. And by definition, it's a paradox that if you come up with a good idea, it's going to cause growth, and the growth itself will eventually cause such complexity that you can no longer execute and deliver the very value that brought you there. It is a paradox. And you see this in nations. And actually, I was at a funeral last week, and it was the last relative of the prior generation died. She was 95, and she had 73 descendants. And already she had 18 great-great-grandchildren. Already those descendants don't know each other. It's hard to imagine within 3 generations, they don't really know each other. And so anyway, in the business world, most leaders don't realize this is happening to them. They hire 2 more people and think, oh, that's good. We got more capacity. What they don't realize is they just added complexity that they don't understand.
Well, I was just going to give you an example. I'm the organization that I'm with right now. It's one of the smallest teams I've been on in my whole career. There's a lot of things I really love about it, but it's been a change to go from, say, an operation of hundreds, literally hundreds, 300-400 people, and now I'm in an operation, actually a whole company that's like 40. And when I joined, we were scaling up and adding. And so let's say, we went from 30 to 40 in the course of 6 months. And that's exactly what happened, was this complexity increased because we added, that's a huge percentage. Yeah. And we added a shift. So we only had 1 shift. Now we have 2. And so you talk about adding to chaos and complexity through communication. So we were, just kind of going through that and finishing some of that up as I read that chapter. And I said, yeah, you feel it and you see it. And so I think as leaders, we have to be prepared. One of the things that I recently told someone on my team, and I think this ties into this topic, is that as you're in a growing organization, you will have to adjust your structure. And if it keeps growing, as soon as your structure is in place, it's time to change again. Because the complexity has changed. And so, the leadership structure, the functions, not just the quantity of people, but your structure, you've got to review that and look at it again. And I felt like that on more than one occasion where, okay, we've got the structure, we had the vision, we executed, we brought the people in, and the structure is right. And then we look and we go, the structure doesn't make sense now. We've got to change it again.
I think the way you talk about that highlights something we don't grasp as the difference between a role of a leader and a scientist. Originally when we start a business, by definition, we're a little more in the scientist role because we're figuring out something we want to build or deliver, and we're heavily involved in doing it. And the rules of science are more predictable. And so we get that working. But to your point, any kind of growth, really a leader is in the science of integrating people. A scientist is in the integration of things, and that scales well, but the science of integrating people doesn't. And if you, as a leader, don't make this transition from I'm integrating atoms to I'm integrating people, you can't make the transition. And the Bible, you can go to a lot of literature for science principles, but the Bible, in my opinion, has the best chemistry rules for the people side. And you violate them at your own risk,
Yeah, I think that, and you talk about this in your book, but as leaders, we have to dabble in the science of psychology, right? You talk about DISC profiles, Myers-Briggs, and that's one of the things that I've found as I've grown as a leader, because I came up through, I came up as an individual contributor, and then I was in the trades, and then I moved into supervision, which is still pretty tactical. You're just keeping things flowing. And then as I've moved into more executive leadership roles where you're making some strategic decisions, you're building an organization and a team, you're making structure decisions, it's far, far more to do with the people side of things than it is the hard sciences. So if we don't see that, especially for those leaders who are growing in their career and moving through those promotion levels, I've seen that cause people to fail because what got you here won't get you there, right? That old saying that you have to change. Hey, one of the things that, Gary, I want to talk a bit about as far as leadership and management that I really appreciated you wrote, and I will tell you that this topic is, I'm going to say, very common knowledge in the circles I run in, which is operations, especially manufacturing operations, but I know your book is written for a broader audience in leadership, and that's this idea of building a habit reinforcing system, it's management's job. And that's almost like more on the, a little heavier on the science side than on the people side, but it's a combination of both. But can you talk about, what is that and what's the importance of that for leaders and managers in an organization to bring order out of chaos?
Habits have an interesting reaction to those. There's something about our minds, the way we're created, we're very creative, and there's something that almost resists any kind of constraints in our life. And too many constraints dampen our creativeness, but there's some sort of optimal balance of bringing, some way for all these human atoms to coordinate and talk to each other and know what role they're in so that it just isn't completely random. And how do you draw create a framework in an organization that is minimalist. It's the least amount of framework you can have and still have order and people work together. That's kind of what that system is getting at. And I don't think there's a cut and dried answer to that. I mean, different kinds of work need different kinds of coordination. But I like to use the air traffic control system in the world as an example. Really with a few parameters: flight number, destination, departure, time, altitude. There's a few parameters that there's some 80 million flights a day in the world. With a few parameters, they've agreed in a way that we can travel safely. Yeah, and so if you got an organization of that, you mentioned 30 to 40 to 50 to 100 to 500, the systems and the processes keep changing that is required to sort of hold this thing together. And that's more, there's a lot of science in that. God does require skill in the sciences. It's not just all shoot from the hip.
I was just looking here at something that, in regards to that topic that you wrote about, that I really like. It gave 3 examples of management system approaches, not specifics, but I really like these. And you said there's the natural garden, the American football, and then the orchestra. Those were the 3 examples.
This really speaks to me well because I've hired lots of people over the years, and I see some people are wired to they chafe at any kind of constraints at all. And those people tend to be good if you say, here's some problem, go figure out.
Yeah, just go solve it. Go solve it.
Go solve it and be creative. The creative part, thinking outside the box, is an attribute that you want. But if you're on an assembly line, putting screws into the door or the bumper or whatever, I guess they do that well now with robots, but you don't want creativity in a planned construction.
Right.
And so the natural garden is that type of role and person that thinks that way. I like to jump to the orchestra because it's the extreme example of giving up all of your personal control. Most of us don't like to do that. We don't like to be controlled. But you look at an orchestra. You've got somebody who wrote the precise note you have to play at this exact second, and there's a guy up there telling you what to do. And people who are in an orchestra love doing it. So they have sacrificed their individuality for a bigger purpose. And isn't all of life like that? We have this trade-off of when can I do my own thing? When can I work together to build a family or a church or a business and give up some of my individuality?
Yeah.
Now, the middle case is we call it, the technical term is agile management. In a football scenario, there's a season plan. We need a new quarterback in the next 2 years because he's going to retire. So there's some strategic planning in football. And then there's a game plan. We're playing this particular competitor, and we've got some strategies we're going to use. And then there's a huddle, which is calling a specific play. But even after the play is called, the individual player has to read the situation and say, oh, I was supposed to be here, but this play broke down. I need to respond and do this. And so that you have this very dynamic, loosely coupled teamwork with a play called, but an expectation to adapt. And in the software world, a lot of software history, we used to approach software like we did building houses, where we would get all the requirements down, then draw a rigid design, and then put 2x4s in. And what we found in software was we never knew enough to design what we were building in advance. We had to instead build a little bit, get a reaction, and build a little bit more. It's kind of like the football play. I run this play and see if we can move the lineman. And you run that play 3 times and you realize you can't. So the middle ground, I think, is where an awful lot of the organization operates. Not all of it. The production line is in the precision. But as a leader, you really need to think through what's the role, mission of my group. And even at the individual level, does this person need to be in the garden? Does this person need to be in agile? And does this person need to be precision? And we don't think that way. We just treat everybody the same.
You should always be analyzing it and reviewing it, measuring those processes to then look and say, is it working properly? What can we do to improve it and to change it as well?
One thing I would add to the habit comment is being honest with yourself about what you will and won't do in your own strength. And so this gets into accountability systems and how you bolster your own weaknesses. And I'll give a really silly example. I need more exercise. I spend too much time at a desk. And we happen to have a 2-acre yard out where we're at, and I have a riding mower, but I go to a gym to get more exercise. And I finally sold my rider. I burned the lifeboats because I knew I bought a walk behind. It's self-propelled, but it's pretty good sized, and I get my pulse up a lot walking behind there. But I knew if I kept my rider, every time I got way too busy or whatever, I just wouldn't use the walker. So I just sold it. Now, the reason I did that is I know me, and so when you have the self-awareness in your life to recognize I do not have the strength to do what I know I should, so put in place a tactic or a strategy to mitigate your own weakness. And I have a friend who says he can't seem to work out on his own, but if he meets somebody, he does, So whatever it is, be honest with yourself in your habits, in your organizations, in your whatever. Hey, it's important that we agree that we do this now. Let's recognize none of us wants to do it.
Yeah. What's the accountability mechanism, both individually and corporately, or as a group?
Yeah, I think that's part of your rhythm thing. Some of these things we don't really like to do, but we know if we create a rhythm or some kind of a cadence, as you said, we'll all be better off.
I'm going to quote in the book what you said is, in a world full of chaos, establishing some repeatable habits on a regular schedule gives people a framework for coordinating with each other. That's super important. And you also talked about the importance of stopping doing the things. Let's just for a minute talk about that. I've talked about it on multiple podcasts, but I think it's so important. And I think that it's something that's hard for people to do. It really is, in organizations.
We have done a lot of coaching with organizations and planning and stuff. And it's always the number one thing on the agenda. People say, oh, great, we're going to finally stop some stuff. Well, when we get to that agenda item, nobody will agree to stop anything, ever.
Yeah, so, they all see it as it's too important, and they can't. Like, they're frozen. They can't stop.
Yeah, one of my biggest, hardest lessons in life was I grew up with the Depression parents, and that you were just taught never to give up, ever. Bulldog on anything. And we had a wrong-headed project that I was really behind in our company, and I wouldn't give up. And the more money we spent on it and the time we invested, the more I was unwilling to give it up, because you don't want to admit that you're not going to get a return out of that. And I remember one February, I was just praying like crazy. We were running out of capital, and I said, God, we need sales to go up to fix this. And he answered my prayer. The sales went down about 20% in a short period of time. And we were forced to kill that project. And it was incredibly painful. This is a stopping. See, I had 70 people working on this project, and we couldn't keep them anymore. We were going to go out of business if we didn't cut our costs. So I had to lay those people off. They were friends. I'll go to my grave remembering how I felt about it. But that stopping unleashed incredible focus in our organization. And we grew 600% in the next 5 years because we finally stopped something that was wrong-headed. So, we've got to get out of the mindset of quitting something is not failure. Quitting something you should quit is absolutely the biggest success you can have. And so it's hard. Boy, it's hard to give up.
You have to be able to have an honest conversation with yourself and, probably the leadership team or your peers and colleagues, but
or your spouse.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah,
they can tell you things you should stop.
Yep. Hey, towards the end of the book, you get into, I think, part 3, and it really starts to look at, I'm going to say people and process, which I think is super important, Gary. So we've talked a lot about, the fact that there's chaos. We're called as leaders to come in and rein in that chaos and some of the systems that can be put in place, but thinking of things in people and process, and I'm a huge believer in that. And you really, I think, talk about some things that I'm passionate about: care for people, one-to-ones. Man, I actually just released a podcast recently with a good friend of mine, and we talked about how important one-to-ones are. I will never stop beating the drum on doing those. Talk to me about your thoughts around caring for people and having candid conversations and effective one-to-ones.
Yeah, let me back up in the sense that the third part of the book is really the most important, and it is the reason it's last is that there's some basic things you had to understand to properly interpret the third part. And the first part is this basics of humans don't obey the laws of physics. So leadership is all about how do you get things that don't obey the laws of physics to work together. Then the second part is more of the process and the science part. How do you create order in a growing organization? Because if you can't create order in the basics, the physics aspect, then you have so much chaos that you can't deal with the people side. So you got to get those two things straight. But the third area is really God's chemistry formula for integrating people into a shared purpose. And since it doesn't obey the laws of physics, what laws does it obey? And, I find it interesting that Jesus, there's 700,000 or 800,000 words in the English Bible. And Jesus basically said all those things are recapped by, 22, 23 words.
Yeah. Yep.
And in a way, he just says, love God, love your neighbor, and your self-identity has to be right too. Love yourself. So the model that's displayed or proposed in the third part of the book is biblical, but people read over and say, yeah, I've seen that before. I don't think they really process the significance of it. The caring, the loving is what it leads to something. If I truly spend one-on-one time with you, we build trust, and then we can then have a more open conversation. Well, the openness is the interface between the cells. And if you've got a corrupt interface, you can't hook those cells together right. And so openness or caring leads to openness and honesty. And from that comes the oneness, the unity of the orchestra or the organization. And those things have to happen in a sequence and build on each other. And we talk about, let's just do team building. Well, you've got to go back to the chemistry aspect, get the interface right. I've got to love you. And the Bible says basically we're not very good at loving people. We're good at loving ourselves, but not others.
Oh, absolutely.
And so the gospel changes us. Jesus comes inside of us and makes it easier, not easy, but easier.
Right, easier.
To love somebody. So I agree with you. The one-on-ones, there's research from Toyota Kata, I think that's where it came from, that shows that there's a direct correlation between one-on-one time and loyalty, performance, trust. Performance is in there, up to about 5 hours a week per person. It's amazing that if, as a leader, who says they got time to spend 5 hours with each person? Now, that doesn't mean it all have to be one-on-one. It can be a hallway conversation where you've got the attention of that person, but there's an intimacy and a trust when you're talking with somebody individually as opposed to as a group. And
yeah,
that's a parenting lesson. I really appreciate what you said you're doing with your 17-year-old. There's a set of things you can do one-on-one with him, and there's a set of things you can do on my 4 grandkids. When I have them together, I can't have any meaningful conversation with one of them.
I give another resource, Manager Tools. It's a podcast, it's a website, and they really talk a lot about one-to-ones and some real technical aspects of it. It's not a Christian organization, but it's a really, really just real good, insightful couple of guys that have been doing this for a long time. But their recommendation is not at least, it's precise, and they have reasons why they don't say more or less, but 30 minutes a week with each of your direct reports, one-to-one. Mm-hmm. And the thing that I've heard over and over again, and I've mentioned this on this show before, is I've had people tell me, well, we talk, I don't need to have one-to-ones. It's different. It's completely different. And so and for me, I insist when I have managers on my team, you have to meet with your direct reports each week. Now, I won't say a half hour, I'm not that rigid on that, but you have to meet closed door, one-to-one. I cannot tell you how many times we've had a turnover issue, a performance issue, and you start doing your 5 whys and you say, have you met with them? Are you meeting with them on a regular basis? And they're not. Mm-hmm. And they're not having those conversations. And you talked about candid and caring conversations. I'll mention another book I've read this year. It's called Radical Candor. And it was the topic of really having very direct, but not harmful, not mean, not destructive conversations, but open and honest conversations in those one-to-ones with people so that they know where they stand. That's what we want. If we think about ourselves, you said it's easy to love ourselves. We appreciate, knowing where we stand with our managers in a way that still shows grace and clear expectations, but realistic expectations. And yeah, it's just so important. And I can't emphasize it enough that anyone who's leading people has to be doing that. The last topic I want to ask you about is this idea of unity on the team. But can you talk about some of the tools or, I guess, methods of bringing that team unity for people, because it's super important?
Well, I sound like a broken record in the sense that purpose is your first priority. So what are you going to unify around? And if you don't have clarity of purpose, there's nothing to unify around. The second thing I would say is that the unity has to come from openness. To you to go in and impose, this is what we're doing, you'll get some kind of
Conformity.
compliance.
Yeah.
You'll get compliance, but you won't get commitment. People want to participate and understand and form, contribute. And so that, I am repeating myself, get the purpose right. In advance, you have to build relationships with people, and the team has to trust each other. Then you can have the openness that really gets you on the same page. And you can't really have unity without openness, and openness you can't have without trust. So it's really in your set of questions you sent to me to think about. One of the questions was, what advice do you give to others? And one of the things that I say is, don't work with people you don't trust. I mean, life is too short. It's too hard to even work to get things done with people you trust. And to your point, if you got somebody you can't build that trust with, you're not doing them a favor or you. You need to move them out. And you're not just doing it to serve you. You're trying to get them in a position where they can work with people they can trust. Because if you can't make it work with them, then move on. Personally, I think this is one thing that people who are not Christians, they think love is a sort of surface level wand of squishiness. And the example of love from Scripture is Jesus went to the cross. I mean, that's love. And love means doing for people what's best for them, not what they like.
That's right.
Speaking the truth and saying, look, you don't really have the skills to do this job. If I don't tell you that, I'm lying to you.
That's exactly right. Yep.
Yeah. And you're just delaying them figuring out how to get in the place where God meant them to be. So I'm pretty hard. You can tell I get emotional about this because I have other people say to me, well, you don't act like a Christian. And it's somebody who doesn't know what Christ's love really is all about, the challenge of it. And so when we're called to love people, that is a huge statement to do what's in their best interest.
Well, hey, I could spend more time talking to you, Gary. I'm going to say that, again, anyone who's a leader, anyone who's a Christian leader, you have to go get this book, Built to Beat Chaos by Gary Harpst. And I mean that. I'm not just saying that because you're on my show. It's hard to find good leadership books from a biblical perspective. And yours is. I will tell you that you cover topics that usually 5 or 6 books cover. And I think you do it well. I mean, it goes from kind of start to finish on principles and theories and then practical application. So great job on that. I really recommend the book. I really do. And it's going to be a go-to on my shelf for a long time. I want to ask you, Gary, are there other resources that you recommend? Who are you listening to for podcasts? Who are you reading for authors? I always try to get those out there for people.
2 books that I end up going back to a lot is Os Guinness, The Call. I don't know if anybody's ever read it, but you referenced earlier secular versus sacred, and he does the best job I've read of really challenging you to realize that every breath you take is sacred in your life, and it doesn't matter what the job title is. And so he really tears down the idea of, if you're in a church role, that's sacred, and if you're farming, it's he really makes me think. I've probably read it over 5 times, and I've given it all copies to my kids. And the second one is a secular book, and it's about Dr. Gregory Burns, and it's called Iconoclast. It really is the science of how the brain functions and how it is we make decisions. And it's really fascinating. I can't go into it. I mentioned it in the book. I give quite a bit of time in there. But, basically the idea is the brain's designed to conserve energy. And because of that, it takes shortcuts that really feed from groupthink. And so when 10 people agree on something, the way the brain actually functions is it stops thinking about it because it thinks, okay, these other 10 have thought about it, so I don't need to. And we can come to erroneous conclusions. It's huge. errors, and he shows the research and neuroscience behind it. That has really helped me because people resist change in life. And if you're going to be a leader, you have to get into the chemistry of how does the mind work? How do people think? And how do I help them get to the right place? And what errors am I subject to? So Gregory Burns, I really like that book. So kind of two very different types of books.
That's good. I appreciate that.
There's too many books. Not enough time.
I know. I always have 3 or 4 that I literally right now on my desk, 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm reading 2. One of them's yours, of course, but So Gary, how can people reach out to you if they'd like to connect with you, ask you questions, maybe work with you? What's the best ways?
Sure. Go to the website. My email and stuff are there. Website's leadfirst.ai or garyharpst.com, either one. They both go to the same place. And of course, Amazon has the book. There's now an Audible version, and that just came out a couple of weeks after the printed version. And the reader is excellent. Reading an audible version of a business book can be pretty dry.
Yeah, they can make or break that. The Audible version. I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
I'm listening to it myself because some of the stuff I wrote a year ago, and I need to be reminded. Oh yeah, that's the insight I had, and it's right, but I forgot it.
Well, we have to be reminded of these principles all the time. I mean,
absolutely. We don't own the truth. We don't own it.
That's it. Yeah. It's the reason that we go back to God's word every day. I hope you go back to God's word every day, and then of course feed on it every Sunday, and you just over and over your whole life. You just have to be reminded, because as you said and Paul wrote, even though we know the right things to do, we don't do them, and so we have to be reminded of the importance of them. Yeah. Well, hey brother, again, thank you for your time. Thank you for this good work that God's called you to do, and being faithful. I'm sure that this was a lot of effort to put this book out. I hope that some of my listeners will go get it, because I think it's important, and there's so much practical wisdom as well as just really deep thinking on some of these topics. So it really was great to meet you and talk to you, and appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Jason. We talked earlier about bringing order to chaos is integrating things, and you're doing that. You are getting truth from various sources, and you're putting it in a form that we can digest it. So I commend and encourage you to continue your godly work. So good for you.
All right. Well, thank you, brother.
Take care, Jason.
And thank you for joining us again this month. I pray that the topics and ideas that Gary and I discussed today will help you be a better leader as you strive to honor Christ in your workplace. And I would encourage you to go out and purchase the book, Built to Beat Chaos.